Hi all, it's Jill Sprott with this week's Scrap Your Stash video. This week we'll be focusing on frames. When you think about it, we frame what matters. We frame photos worth sharing, documents that define us, the emblems of our success. In framing, we call attention to that which we feel deserves attention. We frame what matters. In today's video, I'll walk you through how I created a layout that focuses on how I framed what matters most to me, my family. I began by raiding my stash and pulling out an assortment of frames, like these wood frames from Studio Calico, Freckled Fawn, Basic Gray, and Crepe Paper. I also found paper and chipboard frames from October Afternoon, Basic Gray, Heidi Swap, Studio Calico, and KI Memories. There's Crepe Paper slide frames, and there's also KI Memories paper frames. Now that I had frames, I needed something to frame, and so I printed out some black and white photos along with some shapes from the 2 peas in a bucket printables. You can print out the whole sheet or use the PNG files and pick and choose which ones you want to use. So I put them all together here and printed them out on a sheet of glossy photo paper. The multicolored circle that you see from the printables was actually the inspiration for the color scheme of the layout. I decided to pull pattern papers that corresponded to the colors in those little circles that you see. I wasn't quite sure which papers I wanted to use yet, so I just pulled out those that might work in colored groups and then decided to make my specific decisions later. Knowing how bright and colorful the layout was likely to be, I used a neutral background, a sheet of pattern paper from Studio Calico. The sizes of the photos that you see here aren't random. Ahead of time, I chose the frames and I used a ruler to measure the frames and then ensured that before printing the photos, they would actually match up. There are 3 photos of individuals and 2 group photos. The groups will have 2 different types of frames, but the 3 individual photos, I wanted them to be of equal weight, kind of balanced. No one is really standing out more than the other. And so it was important to me that the 3 frames that I used were the same. You'll notice that as I tuck the photos into the frames, I'm not adhering anything. At this point in the process, I had no idea what the actual design of the page was really going to be. I just knew I wanted lots of frames. And so here I'm just kind of mixing and matching. If you notice the photos that I'm moving around, I've decided on this configuration. A lot of it is based on the body language, the positioning. Notice how my eyes in that middle photo are looking toward the right, and so I made sure there's lots of space there. And then my daughter's photo at the bottom, she's actually looking toward the left, and so I made sure there's lots of space to the left of her as well. So here's where you watch me just move things around the page, and there's a point to it all. There's really no vision yet as to what the page would really be about. I just knew that it was my family. And so you can see here the individual photos took precedence. There's my husband at the top, and then me, and then my daughter. And it has nothing to do with the patriarchy. It's just the fact that I'll start with Rob here at the beginning, because he was born first, supremacy, and then me. And then all of a sudden there was Rob and I together, and that's why the picture of us is there. And then when a mommy loves a daddy very much, etc., then the daughter shows up there at the bottom. And then the very last photo would be of us as a family. Once the photo placement was established, it was just a matter of filling in the open spaces with varying sizes and colors of frames. And I just moved things around here and there to see what worked best. And soon enough, the design of the layout just kind of came together organically. Now I had a bunch of open frames, and it was time to fill them. I've long been looking forward to using this number 3 storyteller's card from Ormolu. Since we are a family of 3, I guess the accent seems sort of obvious, but really I think it's deeply, inspiringly meaningful. And watch how meaningful it is for me to try to figure out where the heck to put this number 3 on the layout. And so I'm moving around, mix and match here and there. And the thing about the 3 is it has to make sense on the layout. I mean, it does because we're a family of 3, but the positioning matters. Next to my face, 3 means nothing, but next to the photo of the 3 of us, 3 works, so that's why I put it there finally. As I added additional accents, I kept thinking in terms of color, going back to those little pattern circles that were the inspiration for the color scheme, and making sure that I was integrating colors along the way that matched with them. In some cases, I created the color. Using a pink neon dauber, I actually just inked a frame. Daubers are great. They're actually not paint. You can see how smoothly they go on. They're just ink, and they dry really quickly. And so within just a minute, this was ready to put on the layout. In fact, not even a full minute. And then I used a different color dauber on that round circle frame. So the first one's neon pink, and then the second color here is neon blue. So as you can see on the wood, it creates this cool kind of stain finish. It's pretty neat. And I kid you not about how fast they dry. Let me show you. No editing here, right? So I put it down, close my dauber, pick it up, and it's dry. Every so often I would pick up my little inspiration circles and make sure that the colors that were on them were actually showing up on the layout. Frames can also be used in a non-frame kind of way. These KI Memories pattern frames are just paper, and so since they were a little too big to fit on the layout as frames, I just used parts of them and tucked them behind the other frames on the layout. So the first one was family, and so I trimmed it down and I tucked it behind this freckled fawn frame. I love the idea of family being the first word on the layout, since it's been said that we start and end with family. So you can see the word family at the beginning and then see my actual family at the end. The second frame that I cut up said us on it, which makes sense here. And so since the frame I wanted to use wasn't square, I just flipped it over, traced a circle, and then cut around it. The cutting does not have to be precise because it's just going to be tucked under the frame, so it can be wretched cutting, which is, my specialty. At this point in the layout, all of the colors that I had set out to use, I had used at least once. The thing about a layout like this, though, is it can be a little busy, and so it's important to repeat colors along the way and create these little partnerships, friendships. For instance, that pink neon, it just kind of stands out. It's eye-catching, but it's a little off. It needs to have its color repeated elsewhere on the layout to kind of ground it. And so one of the places that you'll see the pink is in that little cloud under the family frame. The lining of the cloud and the lines in it are pink, but it's not enough pink to kind of counteract that neon, which is awesome, but again, still a little bit unbalanced. And so I took a stamp from Hero Arts and used pink neon ink and then stamped over a pattern piece of paper. And so that will end up finding its way into the layout so that there's a little extra pink there. And so in that way, I've repeated pink at least 3 times. As I looked at the layout and considered which colors were represented, you can see that yellow has no issues with representation here. There's a ton of it, but blue is underrepresented. And so I went through my scraps and actually pulled out a piece of watercolor paper. It was actually a terrible die cut fail. It didn't die cut all the way through, but it's really neat. You can kind of see this outline of little buildings on it. And then I just used it as scrap paper and was playing with watercolors the other day. I was going to throw it away, but kept it. Apparently with good reason. So I used it here, and I stamped right over it 3 times with this stamp from Evalicious, once again repeating the number 3. Using my trusty paper cutter, I trimmed it down and tucked it behind a frame. But still, the layout was crying out, "More blue!" And so I bravely fought my hoarding impulses and actually used this piece of flower buds paper from Echo Park. I cut it into a small piece and put it behind a crepe paper frame. So there was pink, there was yellow, and there was blue, so now I could just get crazy with this Dear Lizzie paper and do whatever I wanted with color. The pattern is great because it has all of the colors that are already in the layout, but it is a little busy. The secret to using that is just to use small pieces, and that way it doesn't overwhelm or kind of distract from the rest of the layout. It complements everything beautifully. Although I do like the A side of this Nantucket pattern paper from Studio Calico, it's that little check mark on the B side that I have loved ever since I first saw it. It belongs on this layout. The check mark is a symbol of it's all good. It belongs here at the heart of the layout. It's a layout about everything that I've ever wanted. I have it. Check. As the layout was nearing completion, I sought out areas where there needed to be a little more variation in color. And so I backed this circle frame that was red on red formerly with some yellow pattern paper. And if you know me, you can see that the requisite heart shows up there. One more frame to go. For this last one, I reached into my scrap box / pile / mountain and grabbed a piece of corrugated aqua-colored paper. I left the stitching on there just because I thought it was charming. With the frames filled, I set about adding accents to the page. These are really the finishing touches. Most of the additions were printables, those little pieces that I had printed out with the photos early on. Some of them I punched out using a circle punch, others I just cut with scissors. I tweaked a few of them. I didn't just use them as is. For instance, there's a label that says "Love This," and I just cut out the word love and tucked it in the page. There was a little space at the bottom right that felt like it needed to be filled with something, and so I decided to add our initials, R, J, and Z. And so I used these stamps from Mama Elephant, and rather than just use traditional stamping ink, I decided to try my hand at stamping with paint daubers, and apparently it works. It has a really neat kind of artsy appearance that results, as you can see here. And in keeping with the everything in a frame approach, I framed the letters by putting them in a label sticker from October Afternoon. The label was actually a temporary addition though. Since nothing else was adhered, I put it back on the sticker sheet until it was time to officially use it. Alright, with the layout looking just the way I wanted it to look, then it was time to finally start adhering things down. And so for the papers, I used double-sided tape, but the frames themselves, I used craft glue. On to the journaling. So the journaling for this page was actually done in accordance with the design itself and the layout of the photos. Next to each photo, I wanted to put a strip of journaling, and so each of the strips here has something to do with the photo that it's next to. With the strips, I wanted them to overlap a lot of the frames, and so I couldn't add them until each of the frames was definitely complete. So that meant adding some handwritten journaling to the frame that was next to my husband's photo. After adhering each of the frames to the layout, there were just two things left to do. The first was to stamp the date. The date that I chose wasn't actually the date that these photos were taken, because they were taken at different times. The date that I chose was the date that I did the journaling, because for me that's really what the page is about. It's the heart of the journaling. It's the fact that we're a family, and it's me reflecting on that family, and so that's the date that I chose. It's the date that we were framed. The final step to finish the layout was to add the journaling strips. So each of these was placed next to a photo, and it makes sense based on the photo that it's next to. The journaling reads, "First there was you, and then there was me, and then we were a we, and then we were three. And now that we have each other, we have everything." So there you have it. Frames! It's pretty clear. We frame what matters, what we love, what we want to surround ourselves with and be reminded of. For me, that's my family. Now it's your turn. Use multiple frames on a layout, and don't be afraid to use them for items other than photos. Be sure to share your layout with me and everybody else in the Two Peas in a Bucket gallery. I can't wait to see it. Thanks for joining me for Scrap Your Stash.